He was a popular leftist leader and president in Brazil, but with a criminal record. Now, Lula da Silva could run for the top job again. He'd be up against the far-right Jair Bolsonaro. What could that mean for Brazil's polarized politics? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Brazil's Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva was convicted in a corruption and bribery scandal in 2017. But a judge has found the court that sentenced the former president lacked the necessary jurisdiction. The conviction has been annulled and the left-wing politician can now challenge for the presidency next year. Lula da Silva hasn't confirmed if he'll run. But if he does, his main rival would be far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Inacio reports from Rio de Janeiro.
He may not yet have been proven innocent, but Brazil's former president Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva is no longer a felon. And he's back on the political scene with an eye on next year's presidential elections.
I know that I was victim of the biggest legal lie in the 500 years of history. I know my wife died due to the high pressure and the stroke came faster. I was forbidden to even see my brother inside a coffin.
Lula's speech on Wednesday was the first since a Supreme Court judge overturned the corruption convictions, which put him behind bars for 18 months and stripped him of his political rights. Banned from the 2018 elections, the leader of Brazil's left-wing Workers' Party is now seen as a political threat to President Jair Bolsonaro. He says it's too soon to talk about next year's presidential race, but he spoke like a candidate.
Lula is already a very popular leader. Lula presents himself as a moderate leader that this time, and I think that the first speech that he gave this Wednesday was an attempt to show that himself is a moderate. It can put together different groups, different sectors of the Brazilian society. And so I think that he's a problem, a real problem for Bolsonaro and for Bolsonaro's attempt to be reelected.
Lula blasted Bolsonaro for downplaying the COVID-19 pandemic, which has already claimed the lives of almost 270,000 Brazilians, the second largest death toll after the United States.
We have a president who says COVID-19 is a small flu, who says that only cowards fear the virus, and that he does not because he's an athlete. This is not the way a president should act in a civilized world.
Bolsonaro points out that Lula is still not off the legal hook. The decision to throw out the corruption charges was based on a technicality. The Supreme Court judge said Brazil's former president had been tried by a court in the southern city of Curitiba that had no jurisdiction over his case. He may still be retried in the capital, Brasilia. There are many legal twists and turns in this case. The Supreme Court still has to decide whether the judge who convicted Lula was impartial or had his own political agenda and colluded with the prosecution. Meanwhile, Lula has started negotiating an alliance with other left-wing parties and even conservative politicians who are not happy with President Jair Bolsonaro. Inacio, Al Jazeera, Rio de Janeiro.
The former president, commonly known just as Lula, has been one of the most popular political figures in Latin America. He was elected Brazil's president in 2002, becoming the first leftist leader in almost half a century. He served for 8 years, but his bid to run for presidency again in 2018 was blocked because of corruption charges. Lula has been credited with presiding over Brazil's longest period of economic growth in 3 decades. In 2018, he was jailed for accepting an apartment as a bribe in what's known as Operation Car Wash scandal and served 18 months of a reduced sentence. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Sao Paulo, Geraldo Zahran is a specialist on Brazil's ties with the United States. From Providence, James Green, Director of Brazil Initiative at Brown University. And in London, Francisco Dominguez, Head of Latin American Studies at Middlesex University. All right, let me start with you today, Geraldo. Do you believe Lula da Silva will run for the presidency again?
I believe he'll try. There's a lot to happen in this next 18 months until we get the election. He'll certainly be a big part of the political discourse in Brazil, both for the people that support him and the people that attack him in any way, shape, or form.
James, how popular is Lula da Silva now, and how much of a threat could he pose politically to President Jair Bolsonaro?
All indications are that his popularity is increasing very quickly. He gave a press conference yesterday, which was extremely well received, even by the media that had been very hostile towards him in Rede Globo, the global news network. I think his popularity will only increase as he starts carrying out a campaign to travel through the country to speak to the people.
Francisco, you heard James there mention the speech that Lula gave yesterday. I want to ask you about that. In that speech, Lula said it's too soon to talk about next year's presidential race, but he certainly spoke and sounded very much like a candidate, didn't he?
Yes. I think he's being cautious because until, sorry to use a colloquial expression, until, don't count your chickens until they hatch. I think he wants to be cautious. But the whole speech was not only to Brazilians regarding he being the actually potential candidate, but also to the world saying, I'm coming back to rescue the country from the state it is in.
Geraldo, was Lula da Silva essentially presenting himself during that speech as a moderate? I mean, was he putting himself forth as someone who can bridge the political divide in Brazil and bring different sectors of Brazilian society together?
Presenting himself as a moderate is a hard thing when our political landscape shifts so much to the right. The type of extreme right rhetoric we hear these days sort of changes the center of politics. So even though Lula, even when he was a president, he was not a leftist by any means. He was much more a center left or a center actually candidate or president. But presenting himself as he does this week, a lot of people would just frame him as an extremist, as a left-wing politician. So he's gonna try. He's certainly, compared to Bolsonaro or to the military that are part of the government today, Lula for sure is a moderate. And he's going to try to recall those emotions, recall those feelings of a better Brazil, of a less extremist Brazil, and he will get support for that, but he will also get a lot of criticism for that, for people from the left that says that he didn't do enough and he's planning not to do enough again, and this sort of compromise with the elites. With people that say that he should step away and open the space for new leaders, that Lula and PT will do more harm than good. So it will be a balancing act for the next 18 months.
James, one of the things that Lula did during that speech was to really go after Bolsonaro's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, Brazil has lost nearly 270,000 people to COVID-19. That's the worst death toll outside of the United States. And there are local variants of the virus that are turning this outbreak into its worst phase yet. How politically vulnerable is Bolsonaro because of his handling, or as his critics would say, mishandling of the pandemic?
He's entirely vulnerable. And if I may draw an analogy with the United States, even though I realize all the differences between the two countries, he is in a situation like Biden is towards Trump, in the sense that the nation is going to understand and is understanding the disastrous policies of the Bolsonaro administration, and are going to look for an alternative. And they're going to look to the past and a person in the past who had produced a very positive economy and a lot of optimism. And I think he will be able to bolster his support by consistently criticizing Bolsonaro's policies on COVID and other issues.
Francisco, I saw you nodding along to some of what James was saying. Let me follow up with you about one specific point. Hours after that speech that Lula gave, Bolsonaro and some of his team were filmed with masks on. And this suggests that perhaps they were really shaken by the criticism that was leveled by Lula da Silva toward the handling by Bolsonaro of the pandemic. I mean, do you think that this shows that that Bolsonaro and his team were really shaken by this criticism?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're more shaken by the potential decision of the Supreme Court after the ruling by Fakin that, more or less exonerates Lula from all the charges which were, in my view, completely false, and that for which he faced imprisonment. And I think to me that is the main reason. And Bolsonaro realizes that he's very weak. And he's very weak in two senses. Number one, Lula, whatever anybody may say, is a formidable candidate. Every time he goes around the country, he raises passions, he mobilizes people, he unites them in ways that no other politician is able to do. And the second reason why Bolsonaro is shaken is because he knows that if he is the choice, Lula will win. And the overall conservative wing or conservative spectrum of Brazil politics realize they don't have a candidate as formidable as Lula on the right, and this is their problem. They face a very difficult choice. Either they continue with Bolsonaro, which is going to be a dead end, or they find somebody else. And who is that somebody else? It seems to me on those two counts, Lula is very strong. Therefore, I'm not surprised that he was wearing masks after that speech.
Geraldo, has President Bolsonaro lost a significant amount of support among his base due to how he has handled the pandemic?
No, incredibly not really. So Bolsonaro has some hardcore supporters. That range of support is very similar to what happened to Trump in the United States. Something like 25, 30, 35% of the population, depending on which poll you look at. And these people will stay with him. It doesn't seem that anything can shake off that support. But for the moderates that were sort of not knowing what to think about the government, now it's starting slowly. Some polls are showing that his government is being hurt by how his approval rates are being hurt by how he's conducting the pandemic. What I think is happening now is that he's lost. They still don't know how to answer the news that Lula is a candidate again. So what you saw with the masks. And there's this urge for the vaccine, some posts on social media from government officials supporting vaccination, which they didn't do for a year and a half now. So they're lost. They're trying to find a new strategy. They're trying to find a new narrative. And we're going to have to wait and see how they react. Bolsonaro relies a lot on misinformation campaigns, on social media. This has been well documented, and we're probably going to see more of that for the next year and a half.
James, it looked to me like you were nodding along to some of what Geraldo was saying. Did you want to jump in?
Well, I think historically, since Brazil really had its first democratic elections in 1945, the electorate is split, in general terms, a third to the left, a third to the center, and a third to the right. And so Bolsonaro has kind of sunk to that hard right conservative base. It used to be conservative Catholic and middle class, and now it's evangelical Christians as a part of that base. Lula has clear 30 to 40% support. Keep in mind that Haddad, who's the candidate of the Workers' Party in the last election, got almost 45% of the votes against Bolsonaro. And if Bolsonaro does not go beyond 30 or 40%, he doesn't win the election. I think there's a sector that voted for him or abstained from voting in the last election who this time will vote for Lula.
Francisco, these corruption charges that were dropped, they were dropped on a technicality, were they not? I mean, the Supreme Court judge who threw them out said that this case against Lula had been tried in a court that should not have had jurisdiction. So my question is, what happens next? Could Lula be tried again? Is there going to be a review of the decision by the Supreme Court justice? I mean, how far are we from this actually this legal saga actually being over?
Yeah, we do not know. I think this is the reason why Lula was cautious. And I think that's the reason why the Workers' Party is also being cautious. I think it's a reasonable cautiousness that they have to have. Nobody knows exactly what this means in the final analysis. It is possible to go to the Supreme Court and then it's retried. The problem they have is this. Number one, I think the establishment in Brazil is deeply divided. I mean, yesterday, 2 days ago, I think Morale, the vice president, said that he doesn't find any problem with Lula being a candidate, implying, obviously, that all those charges were not real and they're going to be dropped. And then he added to say that he find that, that he thought that it would be difficult for Lula to win the election. So that's one dimension of the thing. And they're deeply divided also regarding what to do. I mean, I think the image of Brazil has gone to the floor in the last couple of years because of Bolsonaro. Even Globo and Veja and several of the media, following Sao Paulo, have leveled heavy criticisms of Bolsonaro, not only on the question of the pandemic, but also on everything else, particularly his successes, his rhetorical successes, and so on. So it seems to me that until this, the final decision is made by the Supreme Court, we will not know. Nevertheless, the message sent to the world, the implied message sent to the world is, we got it wrong. We are going to rectify this. Let's see how we do it, because it's a really real embarrassment. It's a bit of a mess from our point of view. We're going to sort it out because we want to improve our image.
Geraldo, did the decision to quash the conviction charges against Lula come as a complete surprise in Brazil? And also, were Bolsonaro and his team blindsided by the decision?
I think they were caught off guard. At least it seems this way. There are obvious flaws in the prosecution process in many levels. So what was ruled this week was that the accusations against Lula didn't have anything to do with Lava Jato, or at least that the prosecutors could not prove that, and therefore they shouldn't be judged by that court in Curitiba. They had been sent to Brasilia, to the federal courts. The other thing that is also under investigation, or was ruled this week by a group of the Supreme Court judges, was suspicions that Sérgio Moro, the judge in charge of Operação Lava Jato, was being partial and was in collusion with the prosecutors. So there are two charges going on there at the same time, which could deeply hurt everything that Lava Jato did. On top of that, even if charges are presented again in Brazil and a new accusation starts, a new trial starts for Lula, if you follow the schedule of a legal process in Brazil, it's very hard that those will be charged in time for the 2022 election. Exactly how it happened in 2018. I mean, Lula's case was sort of put in a fast track, and all courts were, working very, very fast to get him out of the 2018 election. So there are obvious mishandlings of the case, which could actually hurt not only the Lula case, but all other cases that Moro and Lava Jato persecuted against. This is a political case. This is not a legal case. Those decisions won't be taken by the rule of law only.
James, if Lula da Silva officially enters the fray and decides to run for president, how likely are we to see Jair Bolsonaro start to try to implement more populist policies to ensure continuing support from his base?
So he runs a real dilemma. He faces a real dilemma because in order for him to be elected, he built an alliance with a person who became the Minister of Finance, who has insisted on a very conservative neoliberal economic policy for the Paulo Guedes, who insisted on a very conservative neoliberal policy for the country with tremendous budget cuts and against the possibility of significant expenditures of the government, the federal government. So in order for Bolsonaro to appeal to working class, ordinary people by increasing or extending the possibility of financial payments to people for COVID relief, he faces a real conflict with economic conservatives and sectors of the establishment who supported Bolsonaro because they felt that their economy would benefit them in the long run. And so he's running a real risk there of alienating or weakening some of his important political base and economic base in terms of establishment figures that have supported his candidacy, even though they're against some of his policies, his cultural policies, his homophobia, his racism, his comments about different sectors of Brazilian society.
Francisco, just how dire is the economic situation right now in Brazil, and how much will the concerns about the state of the economy dominate election debate in the campaign going forward?
Well, some commentators who know Brazil very well, refer to the Brazilian economy as being pulverized by Bolsonaro in 2 years. Obviously, the pandemic has made this worse. First of all, he's privatized just about everything he could, making things much more difficult in terms of particularly generating huge amount of unemployment because of layoffs for public sector workers. Secondly, this came from before him, but he is insisted on austerity on health and education and social benefits. And there is a significant proportion of the population, millions of them, who actually are part of the informal sector. And unless they get support, such as the program Bolsa Familia, that gave them regular income, they're not going to be able to actually be better or even not go hungry, which is what Lula tried to do during his administration. So therefore, he faces the enormous difficulty of trying to deal with too many difficulties. And I don't think he's got the resources to really, sort out the problems of the economy. The economy has contracted between 11 and 14%, depending on who you consult. And in the context of the pandemic, with these austerity measures, which are really harsh, plus the significant amount of repression he has inflicted on the population, then I think the possibilities of any serious economic recovery with any rescue package, which is not going to exist in terms of funding for it, then I find it impossible to believe that he's going to be able to do something serious about it. So he's going to be judged on the merits of the economic recovery, which everybody else in the world is trying to do, and then on the merits of his performance on the question of the pandemic. On both counts, he fails abysmally.
Geraldo, if the election were held today and if Lula were running, do you think that either Lula or Bolsonaro would have enough support to get to a second round vote?
Well, probably both. That's the most likely scenario, and that's the scenario that, in a sense, they're both betting on. Lula is betting on having Bolsonaro as his nemesis, and Bolsonaro is betting on having Lula as his nemesis, just for all the reasons that Francisco just mentioned. If this is an election about the pandemic, Bolsonaro will lose. If this is an election about the economics, Bolsonaro will lose. He doesn't have results to show anywhere on those areas. What he has, the only thing he has, is to keep banging the drum that he is not Lula, that Lula is going to make things worse again, that we cannot let Lula go back to power or the Workers' Party go back to power. So they're both betting on it in a sense. The Workers' Party and Lula believe they can go to the second round and win, perhaps even win on the first round. But there's a lot of moderates that say that this dispute and this polarization will be bad for Brazil in general, and that Bolsonaro might even win. I mean, he won against Haddad in 2018. So they're holding their horses, and they're actually betting that they'll both go to the second round.
All right, well, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Geraldo Zahran, James Green, and Francisco Dominguez. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.